Episode 204, Understanding Desire Discrepancies in Marriage with Amanda Lauder.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a highly trained, experienced life coach making a great impact in the lives of their clients. And together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with a coach? Here we go.
In this episode, Heather is joined by marriage and sex coach Amanda Lauder to explore the complex topic of sexual desire within marriage, particularly focusing on the common challenges of desire discrepancies. Amanda provides a compassionate and insightful look at the biological, psychological, and sociological factors that shape desire, explaining why it can often feel like an uphill battle for many couples. With humor and expertise, she demystifies desire, offers practical advice, and shares actionable steps to building a more fulfilling, intimate relationship. Whether you're struggling with the desire differences or just want to deepen your connection with your partner, this episode will give you the tools to transform your relationship. Please enjoy.
Hey friends, welcome to the podcast today, and I am joined today by Coach Amanda Lauder. Hello, Amanda.
Hi, Heather.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. When this is going to air in November, but Amanda and I just spent some time together with a bunch of other coaches at a retreat this weekend. So it's like long time no see.
I know. It feels like forever.
I know. It's a good time. It was a good weekend. Amanda, you have been on before. For those of you who have heard Amanda's past podcasts, you'll remember they're amazing. If you haven't, you should go back and find those and listen to them. But for those of you who don't know who Amanda is, Amanda, inform them about you.
Yeah. So I'm a sex coach, which is really fun in this culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm a marriage and sex coach. So I am coaching women and men and couples on how to have a better intimate and sexual relationship. And I've been coaching for, like 6.5 years. It's insane. I feel like it's been forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I love what I do.
Well, of course you do, because you just bring a lot of happiness to people that I'm certain felt like it wasn't even possible to find for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting to see. Like, I just met with a couple a few weeks ago. I've been working with them for a while. And when they first came to me, he was like crying on our consult call that like, it's just not what he imagined that their marriage and sexual relationship would be. And it was so challenging for him. And he just wanted something more for his marriage and to love his wife in the way that he wanted to. And she was really resistant, but willing to do coaching. And then I met up with them a few weeks ago and they were like, I don't think we need the rest of our sessions because we have this amazing marriage and sexual relationship now. And he started crying again. And he was like, this is what I've always dreamed of. And that's just so rewarding. So,
well, there's no better, I don't want to use the word testimonial, but kind of, right? Like there's no better validation for you, I'm sure, in doing what you do than hearing things like that.
Yeah, it really is remarkable to see how these couples, and they're putting in the work. I'm just the guide, right?
Absolutely.
It's not me, it's them. They're putting in the work, but I love being a part of their experience and guiding them into something better.
I love it. Okay. So I don't want to keep people waiting because I'm sure they're like, ooh, well, let's hear what we're going to talk about today then.
Yeah.
So where do we want to go with our conversation today, Amanda?
Well, I thought we would talk more about sexual desire and how troublesome it can often seem, especially for women. It's probably the number one thing that women come to me for is a lack of sexual desire. And when it comes to couples, a desire discrepancy. is probably the number one thing that they come to me for.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've found in doing this for so long is we just don't have a very good understanding of sexual desire and what it is and where it comes from. We just think it should be there all the time. And when it's not, it can be very frustrating and distressing. So I thought that would be a good topic for our discussion today.
It sounds like a great one. I love the use of the word discrepancy because that takes away, I mean, there obviously is differences in marriage and it's sometimes very shame-filled differences, right? Like,
yes,
for the most part, I'm assuming it's women that are like, that have shame around that. And so when you use a word such as discrepancy, it takes that away kind of. It just is like, yeah, it's just a difference. It's just a discrepancy.
Yeah, but there actually is shame on both sides because men often feel very ashamed of how much desire they do have.
True.
And women often feel ashamed of their lack of desire. And I would also say the reverse is also true. Like women who are higher desire partners tend to have a lot of shame about that. And men who are lower desire have a lot of shame about that. So there's just shame all around.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. It's so fun too.
Right? So fun
to navigate that, add that into a marriage when marriage is already complicated at times. So
yeah, for sure.
You throw that in and it's just,
well, and it's not something that you think is going to be a problem. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, most couples that I see could, before they were married, they could barely keep their hands off of each other. And they're like, yeah, this is not going to be a problem. And then something changes and they're like, wait, what is happening here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is not what I thought it would be.
Okay. So educate us about desire and the discrepancies thereof.
Yes. So sexual desire is often referred to as libido. Okay. It's very, I would say, multifaceted, but it's really about just wanting to engage in sexuality with your partner. And it takes a lot of different forms and ideas and stuff. But at its core, sexual desire involves a very complex interplay between biological factors, psychological factors, and sociological factors. And those can fluctuate and change all the time, depending on your life and your relationship, how old you are. So there's a lot that goes into it, and we can talk more about those specific things. I think what's really important to also understand is just because of biology, men often tend to be the higher desire partner. I would put it probably at like 60-40.
Okay.
Just because they have a lot of testosterone, and testosterone is the hormone that is the physiological driver for sex. So if we look at men in general, their brain is basically marinating in testosterone at varying levels. So it starts when they're still in the womb. That's what turns them into male versus female, one of the things. During puberty, the levels of testosterone increase dramatically. If you have ever had a teenage boy, you know this very well, right? So if testosterone were like a glass of water, okay, a 9-year-old boy would have the equivalent to about a cup a day. By the age of 15, it would be 2 gallons a day.
Oh, my word.
So that's a lot of testosterone.
Yeah.
Right. So it makes sense why men have this drive. Now let's contrast that with women. Okay. So on average, depending on how old you are and stuff, but on average, men have about 1,000 anagrams per deciliter of testosterone. Women at the age of 18 have 76.
Yep. There's some discrepancy. There's the discrepancy. Right there.
And by the time we're 40, it's half that. Okay.
Interesting.
So, we have these huge discrepancies. So if you're, men, if you're listening and you're wondering why your wife doesn't have as much desire as you, That's a big part of it. Women, if you're wondering why you are not having desire like your husband, that is a big part of it. So just knowing that, I think, normalizes a lot of what you're feeling. Now, there's also other things that come into play, right? So hormones are just one aspect of that. And then we get, our fluctuating hormones as women, with estrogen, progesterone every month with our cycle, along with testosterone, as well as pregnancy, breastfeeding, perimenopause, and then menopause.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that fluctuating hormones, it's no wonder we don't have a handle on this. Okay. We also have neurotransmitters that are at play. We have brain processes that are at play. Studies show that men's functioning in their brain processes also processes sexual stimuli differently and more than women. So, like, there's so much just in the biological aspects, and we haven't even touched on the psychological and sociological aspects yet.
Right.
So, I just think it normalizes things when we understand that, like, as women, we are not supposed to be like men.
No, that's a hard thing for us to, we think it should be the same.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if we think about it, we really don't want it to be the same either. So
No.
I love hearing the science behind it, because I do agree. It makes it normalizes it. It just takes it to numbers versus like the emotional.
Like, you must not love me. You must not be
Yes.
attracted to me. That kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But that plays into it too. And that's
Right.
that's more in the sociological. So we can talk about that. But first, as part of that biological in those brain processes, I wanted to just touch on the difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire.
Okay.
So this is from the work of Emily Nagoski in her book, Come As You Are, one of my very favorite books. But the book gives a really valuable insight into the mechanisms that are at play there. So inside of our brain, we have a sexual excitation system. It's like the gas pedal driving that arousal and sexual response. And then we have a sexual inhibition system that acts like a brake, regulating and inhibiting those sexual cues and behaviors. And for women, especially, because again, with the biological stuff, right, that balance is often quite skewed. The accelerators aren't as sensitive as a man's accelerator is, and those brakes tend to be way more sensitive than men are. So understanding that, maybe the things that do turn that arousal up, so that you can push on that accelerator more, and understand the things that dampen your sexual responsiveness, so that you can work on removing those or dealing with those as a couple. Like, if you just know that you can't relax, and your mind has a really hard time if the dishes aren't done, or if the kids are still awake, or something's weighing on your mind, being able to take care of those things so that you can be present and relax can be really helpful. So just understanding that about yourself is really important. And they talk about it as like spontaneous versus responsive. And I actually don't love that framing as much. I think men also are responsive. It's a lot easier for them to respond. So after biological, then we have the psychological dimension. And this is most often as a coach, when I'm coaching one person, that we deal with. And the psychological factors are largely governed by thoughts, belief systems, emotions, experiences that influence the desire, including trauma, all of that. Now, I don't deal as much with trauma as a coach, but I can recognize it and refer people when I see it, right? But all of those things play into what we're dealing with. A lot of the conditioning that we have. So, conditioning is the way that we operate in the world based on what we view. So how was sex talked about or not talked about in your family? What did you glean about sex from religion? Now, some people did not have the licked cupcake lessons in young women, and a lot of people did. And that influences how we think and believe and what emotions we feel when it comes to sex. There's a thing called good girl syndrome, if you've heard of that. Like good girls don't like sex, good girls don't want sex, but that's not the way that our heavenly parents made us. So it's actually doesn't work in our favor. We also get a lot of messages just at the culture at large, right? Just from society in general about sex. All of that affects it. How we think about our bodies, our self-esteem and our body image. Stress is one of the biggest factors for sex. Like the majority of people, if they are stressed, their sexual systems, cortisol levels rise and it turns off all of our sexual response. So we're not in the mood for sex. There is a small portion, maybe like 20%, that actually desire sex more when they're stressed. But part of that is them knowing and believing, which is true, that sex actually helps when we're stressed.
And is that statistically, are you talking about women in that statistic, or is that
all.
Men or all? Okay.
Yeah. Men tend to be more of the ones that like it when it's when they're stressed, because they realize that it actually helps them.
Okay.
Right. And women are like, that just makes me feel more stress.
Right. Okay.
But I'm the opposite. But part of it is, I'm sure, my mindset that I know that it actually helps me feel better when I'm stressed. So.
Yeah. The conditioning is, and I don't want to say it's like specific only to our religious culture, because it's yes, very much so, right? Like it's just, I think, religious culture in general, and then just society in general. So we have to be careful not to think, oh, well, this is just one more, this is something I can blame on the way I was brought up in my religion. And that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah. I mean, when I started in this work, I could very much see how religion had influenced my own views. But I mean, I coach women of all different religions and even some that aren't religious, and it still affects them in the same ways. They still have these same, a lot of the same conditioning. So yeah, it's not just ours.
Yeah. I always like to point that out, because we have to be careful in thinking, well, let's just chalk one more thing up to my religion that that could be a little bit challenging at times. So,
yeah. So as a coach, that's primarily what I'm dealing with, is those thoughts and belief systems and conditioning and all of that, and working with that to help. A lot of those are breaks, right? So really releasing those breaks so that we can start pushing on the accelerators more. Yeah.
That's a great visual, by the way, like the accelerator and the brake. It's helpful.
Yeah. And like, if you have that brake on, like, let's think about teaching our teenagers to drive. If they're riding that brake and pushing on the accelerator, like, you can get where you want to go, but it's going to take a lot more gas and effort. Right. Or if you ever have left the emergency brake on, driven,
yeah, you can't get going.
But it doesn't matter how much you push on that accelerator, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
So you've got to have both.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. So we recognize then that there is physical, psychological, what was the other one? The other word?
Well, we haven't talked about sociological.
Well, no wonder. I'm like, how come I can't think of the other one?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's do that then.
Well, sociological is really what's in our environment. So very much our relationships. So when I'm working with couples, we're dealing a lot with this. Like, what is going on in your relationship that makes it easier or harder to be sexual with your partner? Right? Really working on those relationship dynamics. And then we also have things just like societal norms and gender roles and media representations and institutional structures and all of that go into it as well. But the biggest thing that I deal with as a coach, especially when I'm coaching couples, is that relationship dynamic.
Yeah.
Like if things aren't going well in your relationship, you don't want to have sex with that person.
Yeah. It would seem like the line is probably kind of blurry between the how come I can't think of that word again?
Sociological.
The sociological and the psychological, the psychological, like they probably cross borders frequently.
Absolutely. There. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because if there's the facts of what's happening in your relationship, but then there's the beliefs of what you think should be happening and what the stories that you're telling yourself about what's happening. Right. So working through all of those is really important.
Yeah. Okay. So we know that. And now what do we do with that?
Yeah. Right.
We want the magic. We just want a magic button that we can just push and be like, okay, here we go.
Yes. But okay. So women, especially, in order to be sexual, we need 3 things. We need low stress, which is so fun, right? Like, because we just have
very possible,
very little stress in our lives these days. We need high affection. So that doesn't mean like being groped by our husbands. That means all of those things that you used to do when you were dating and engaged, when you couldn't engage in sex yet or chose to not engage in sex yet. All of those, like the holding hands, the hugging, the kissing, the snuggling, right? That high affection is really important. Something that I hear a lot from women is that they feel touched out, especially like young moms, right? Like, I am just so touched out. The last thing I want him to do is to touch me. But a lot of this has to do with the energy that's happening there. So when you're a young mom and you've got, babies or toddlers and young kids like crawling all over you, what they're doing is a very taking energy. You feel like their life is being sucked out of you, right? And if the husband is coming with that same taking energy, like I need to touch you for my own personal satisfaction so that I can feel connected to you, we don't want that as women. And so the energy really needs to be a giving energy, a replenishing energy, a nourishing energy. That's what we want as women. So when I say high affection, it's that kind of touch and that kind of energy. And then the third thing is that things need to be explicitly erotic, which sounds really scary to us Latter-day Saint women.
To us conservative people.
Yes. And what I mean by that is, so the word erotic is driven from the word eros. Okay. So what eros is life-giving energy. And we can experience eros energy in a lot of different ways in our life. I mean, that's really where our creativity comes from. It's where we feel most alive. I know you are a big like hiker and like love to be out in nature, right? Yeah. You probably get a lot of that life-giving energy out in nature.
Yep.
Right. And so how can you channel that energy into your relationship?
Would you say that energy, like we hear people talk a lot about feminine and masculine energy, would the eros energy be the feminine energy, or is it not?
It's not. Eros energy is not masculine or feminine.
Okay.
But it's our strongest traits in that masculine and feminine energy, because eroticism is not just strictly female, that feminine energy. There's also very erotic masculine energy too, but it's that life-giving energy for them as well. But it also means that like we really need to play into the things that make us feel alive and turn us on and direct us towards our spouse. And that might mean using your imagination and fantasizing and visualizing body processes. What do you want to do to him? What do you want him to do to you? Right? All of that fosters that life-giving energy, that eroticism that makes our sexual relationships something worth wanting. Like a lot of people think they don't like sex. They just actually don't like the sex they're having.
Mm-hmm.
It's not sex worth wanting. And so when you are having sex that is full of this life giving energy, that's sex worth wanting. That's sex worth desiring. And it's going to make those desire levels go up.
Yeah, that phrase worth wanting that's a great distinction. That kind of gives you something to focus on and something to center your mind on in creating something that is worth wanting.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of women have this idea that sex is for men. Sex is they have to do this because men, quote unquote, need it.
Right. It's a duty.
It's a duty. It's an
yeah.
obligation. To be a good wife, this is what I need to do. I'm sorry, but that is not life-giving energy. That just want to sucks.
Right. Like
it's
that's taking energy.
Yep. I mean, even if you're just like, yes, he needs it, so I'm freely giving it, that's not replenishing. That's not nourishing. So like, that's not usually sex worth wanting.
Right.
And so sex worth wanting is something that is fun and pleasurable. It's a place of freedom. It's a place where you literally feel better when you're done.
Yeah. So what would you advise somebody who is having a hard time visualizing or knowing what sex worth wanting even is?
Yeah. Well, you can start listening to my podcast.
Okay. That's a great place to start.
Right. I think when you can start educating yourself about what good sex actually is, that can be a very empowering place. So, in our very small culture, bubbled culture, we often don't understand what good sex actually is. We have all these ideas of like porn and stuff, and we're like, well, I don't want that. And not that I want anybody to go looking at porn, because I hate porn, but all porn is somebody's fantasy that they put on a screen.
Right.
And for a couple who's engaging in something consensually and where it's a place of freedom, where there's mutuality between the two, it's not just for him, not just for her, but a mutual place where both have pleasure and freedom and enjoyment. Like, it could look like what you see on a screen. It could also look very different. There's so much that it could be. So really think, like, before you got married, when you pictured sex, what did you think it was going to look like? If you could sit, like, a lot of a process that I have a lot of my clients do is, I want you to just sit with your eyes closed and use your imagination of what a good sexual experience would look like to you. I want you to bring in all of your senses. Like, where are you? What do you see in the room? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you touch? What are you feeling in your body? When you can bring in that sensual experience, you can get a better idea of what good sex can look like for you.
Yeah, it's all the senses.
Yeah. I mean, sex is supposed to be a sensual experience, right?
Right.
And that means involving all of our senses.
Yes. I think we hear the word sensual and we often don't relate it to the senses, but that's where the word comes from. So when you can specifically label it out, that does make a difference.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for addressing that, because I think that a lot of people are like, okay, well, you can tell me that, but what does that even look like? What do I do to increase that?
Yeah. I mean, I have lots of different exercises and things that I give to my clients, but that's something that anybody can do, is just start thinking about what you would want. And then being willing to talk to your partner about it. And if you don't feel like you can talk to your partner about it, then you might need a coach.
Right. Well, that what you would want is that's a barrier in and of itself because women in
Yeah.
general don't think about
They don't.
what they want, whether it's
Sexual or otherwise.
right, right.
Yeah.
It's kind of a thing we have not done. It's a practice that we have to
Yep.
engage in and be intentional about.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's actually one of the exercises I have my clients go through is just start writing down what they want in their life and not just
Right.
sexual, all desires, right? Do you want to go to Paris? Do you want to drive a certain car? Do you want to get a degree? Do you want to go eat ice cream? Do you want to, like, whatever you want to do? Like, really starting to tap into all of your desires because a lot of times as women, we have subjugated our desires and put everybody else's needs in front of our own. And we are never going to be in touch with ourselves if we don't understand that ours are of equal value to everyone else's.
Yeah. And like the story behind that is that is a noble way to live our life where
Yes.
everybody's needs are more important. So it's a really hard thing to even shift out of because it feels
Yes.
prideful or it feels selfish to even
Selfish. Yep.
consider
Mhm.
doing something like that because it's kind of been our one up in some ways
Yes.
to be noble and
Yes.
not
Yeah.
to
And
go
I
on
mean,
what we want.
again, we don't want to, villainize the church or anything, but there are lots of conference talks about, these men and their noble wives and their noble mothers who sacrificed everything for the good of their families.
Right. Right. And that's once again not specific even to the rhetoric within our church, right? You will hear
No.
that everywhere, but we're
Yes.
referencing it because that's most likely what we have listened to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it happens definitely outside of the church, but
Yeah.
like I remember a story of, a mother who had cancer and would and so I think the father went out and bought her an iron, like an iron, right, that she could sit and iron rather than rather than standing and ironing. I'm like, why isn't he ironing his own shirts? She's got cancer, right? And she's touted as this very noble woman for doing this, which great, but that sets us up to not tap into what's most important to us, and that translates to all areas of our life.
Well, and just because some people have a hard time shaking that, the honest truth is when we can touch into the things that we want and we can look into that, we become bigger and better for for everybody outside of us as well.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a selfish motive, but it actually is better for the whole. And so it isn't a selfish motive if thinking that is difficult for you to work through that. I just think sometimes you have to frame it that way so people can recognize that.
We definitely have to frame it that way.
All right, Amanda, is there anything else that you want us to know today before we take off?
I think the only thing, going back to the desire discrepancies, let's say you're listening to this and you're the higher desire partner. The easy thing I'm sure you want to do is like go and have your lower desire spouse listen to this. I'm like, okay, here's all the things you need to do so that you can get your desire levels up to mine, because mine are better than yours.
Like that's superior. That's a better place to be.
Yes. Yeah. And it's not. It really isn't. One of the things that we want to work on, especially within a couple, is building a very collaborative marriage where your wants and desires and needs are equal to my wants and desires and needs. And those can look very differently, but making room for both of you in where you are. And that might mean that the higher desire spouse needs to temper themselves while the lower desire spouse figures out what is worth wanting and what do I actually want this to look like. So there's not one that's better or worse than the other. They're just different. We actually have desire discrepancies in all areas of our life. We just this one seems to be a little bit more noticeable
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yells a little bit louder.
Yeah.
The communication that will take to have
Yeah.
conversations like that, to help each other in that process, can feel challenging for people. But I just say, you just dive in. You just have to start talking about it, whether you're fumbling
Yep.
around or you don't even know what to say. It's just start struggling even with the conversation, because I find that as being like twofold, right? Like you have those conversations, and that in and of itself creates intimacy and
Yeah.
connection.
Yep.
And so just the conversation is worth having for that reason, right? Because that
Absolutely.
we all need that increased connection and intimacy, and that goes hand in hand then with having more desire in our relationships as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point.
Amanda, thank you so
Yeah.
much. I
Yeah.
mean, everyone needs to just jump over to her podcast and hear all the things, because we can't dish it all out today. But
No, we can't.
Amanda, tell them where they can find your podcast and where they can find the other things that you have to offer.
Yeah. So if this topic is of interest to you, I do offer a free class that goes way more in depth on these on my website. And it's just amandalauder.com/free class. It's really easy. I occasionally offer it live, but I also have it just as evergreen on my website when I'm not offering a free one. My podcast is Sex for Saints, and you can find that on all of the podcast apps. There's over 340 episodes, so it's a little overwhelming.
Where would you say they should start? Like, are you a start from day one kind of person, or with your podcast, or?
Well, I mean, not necessarily from day one. I actually do on the homepage of my website, I have a podcast guide.
Okay. I think I
That
remember seeing that. That's why I asked that, because I felt like you had that.
Yes. So it'll kind of guide you through some of the big topics and stuff. But I would just look through like the different topics and episode titles and see which ones interest you. But don't bypass necessarily the ones that are like, oh, well, I don't need that, because chances are you do need it. Like a lot of the ones that get like the most downloads are the ones that are specifically sex related, which I totally get.
Mhm.
But the ones that people actually need are the ones that are relationship. Like we really have to get that relationship going, right? So both are important. And then I just on my website, I offer individual coaching for both men and women. I have couples coaching, and then I do have a membership for women. It's a little bit lower price point, but not as hands-on with me.
Gotcha.
So
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We'll link to those things in our show notes to make it easy for people. And I appreciate it. Thank you for
yeah,
being with me today.
thanks for having me, Heather.
All right. We'll see you all again next week. And thanks, Amanda, once again. Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.